Hello, everyone. This is Tom King, and I'm President and Founding Director of the Fundación Borincana. And I want to welcome everyone to the WebPanel, Energy Regulation in Puerto Rico. I am joined today by Noel Zamot from, formerly the Revitalization Coordinator and now Principal at Atabay. I'm also joined by Jose Berto Roman, who is the former commissioner on the Puerto Rico Energy Regulation Committee, now Bureau, and also joining in place of Thomas Bourgeois of PACE Energy and Climate Center, who unfortunately had to attend to other matters at this time, is Joe O'Brien Applegate, from the same PACE Center or Energy Center. I'll let each of them introduce themselves in just a second. Just want to double check to make sure that their phones or mics are unmuted. Joe, I just unmuted yours, and Noel,
I think I'm unmuted now, so.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So we are all on. Noel, I don't know if you've sorted your video issues, but if we can't, we'll just go with your voice from the cloud.
Okay. Can you see me? I should be.
Let's see. I can see. Yes, I can. There we go.
There you go. Awesome.
Sorry, I thought for a second I was looking at CP Smith, so I don't know if that's.
No, it's I don't know how to take that. That's either really good or really bad. So.
In any event, thanks everyone for joining us. Just to prep this for a moment, Puerto Rico's new regulatory regime is going to be the first in the world to manage the transformation from a traditional vertical utility central generation model to a distributed prosumer model. This is a key area that can facilitate or hinder the successful recovery and transformation of Puerto Rico and to lift hundreds of thousands out of poverty. Puerto Rico has the privilege and the responsibility to rewrite the utility regulatory handbook for the 21st century. I don't want to underemphasize or overemphasize that. It's just simply the truth. There are definitely some examples and roadmaps as part of what has to be done moving toward a prosumer grid, something that's resilient and distributed, has the past and has been framed in Act 17, which is, if not then among the most progressive energy policies in the world. But of course, it comes down to deed and action, and regulation is going to be a key to making this happen. And the new regulation that's emerging and forming will need consistent, thoughtful, pragmatic, and innovative voices, many participating, several joining us on this particular call. So what I'm going to do as we get started is really ask each of the panelists in turn to speak a couple of minutes about their background and what they are bringing to this particular conversation. So maybe I'll top to bottom in the videos that I'm looking at. I'm going to go with Joe O'Brien and ask you to talk a little bit about what you and the PACE Center are up to.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe O'Brien Applegate, and I'm an energy policy analyst here at the PACE Energy and Climate Center. We work here to secure clean energy through renewable energy, resilient energy planning. We participate in sort of state and regional regulatory proceedings, and we also participate in utility rate cases and rate making proceedings to try to animate markets for distributed generation and for third-party access to the grid and to customers.
Great, thanks Joe. Noel, you're next on the right to or left to right.
Excellent. I'm Noel Mott. I was the revitalization coordinator for the Financial Oversight Board of Puerto Rico up until the 15th of March of this year. I've probably worked with many of the folks on this call previously. My background, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, engineer by education, then went into the military, then went into business, where I was recruited to come to Puerto Rico and essentially be the one named position for economic development on the island. Notably, immediately after Hurricane Maria, I was asked to serve as the CTO of PREPA, the Chief Transformation Officer. It was the board's and Congress's view at the time that PREPA was not moving fast enough with transformation initiatives that were evidently required after the two disasters. That was fought in court very aggressively by the Rosselló administration and really started an 18-month, very dysfunctional relationship between the board and the government of Puerto Rico. Whereas they could have collaborated towards fixing a number of structural issues on the island, it then became a bit of a fight. And we now have another hurricane, probably 150 miles out, whatever it is today, in Puerto Rico. Frankly, is no better than it was before Maria. As far as grid goes. My current interest is in ensuring that ethical capitalism is really the way that Puerto Rico regains access to the capital markets and that investment comes into the island. And I'm keenly aware that Puerto Rico needs not just private investment, but the right type of private investment into the energy sector. Renewables, distributed resources, any technology that can really get us off the path that we were before and into the future. And when I have more time, I'll tell you my Uber joke about PREPA, which pretty much explains, I've been told, exactly why we find ourselves in this situation.
All right, thanks, Noel. And if you don't want to tell it now, we'll have plenty of opportunity later, and we'll
Excellent.
Put you on the spot before we end the call.
Excellent.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Jose Roman.
Thank you, Tom. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to everyone. My name is Jose Roman, engineer by training. I'm the part of the first group of regulators in Puerto Rico of an independent regulatory body. Spent 4 years as a regulator. One of the last of my last year as a commissioner, I was the chairman of the commission. We had our adventures to lead the transformation of the utility or the energy sector in Puerto Rico, and it's an ongoing process that the new regulatory body has to carry on and hopefully get it to the end zone perfectly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jose. So there were 3 key areas that wanted to focus on for this particular panel, and I'll set them out and set them up. Very simply, we wanted to take a look at the effect, if you like, of the current and ongoing political ructions in Puerto Rico and what impact that may have, positive or negative, on the regulator and the regulation of the energy and the transformation required in Puerto Rico. And that's very, very much an open forum to discuss. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists for their thoughts and views. We also specifically want to dig in a little bit on the integrated resources plan and the process in approving that for Puerto Rico. And absolutely topical for this week and last are the ongoing processes and procedures around the wheeling regulations for Puerto Rico. So I think I did no particular order, but I am actually going to pick on Jose first for this. We've had discussions, and I think the political vacuum in a sense by the departure of the governor and the dislocation, Wanda Vasquez becoming governor. Does that, I posed a question earlier, does that free up the regulators potentially to be a little bit more aggressive, or has their loss of patronage meant that they're rudderless or have less guidance as required to make the transformation? Jose, and then everybody else just follow in after.
That's well, without being on the board, right? So this is just our, what we see sitting from the outside. A regulator, their job is the first job is to extract performance out of the utility. That's the job. The regulator then has to decide, do I want to preside or do I want to lead these efforts? And it's a big distinction. Presiding over the transformation is just going over the laws and whatever the legislature assigned them to do. And they're just going check by check by check and say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. And then open up an administrative proceeding and inviting interveners if that is required. Try to make it as public as possible. And it's just a matter of just going through a checklist. That type of regulator is not useful for Puerto Rico, right? Because all acts, all enabling acts have a long list of things to accomplish, right? But it's the leading regulator, the regulator that says, okay, there is a process or an efficient way to carry out what we want to do. And then open up the proceeding, asking the right questions, and then determining, first of all, what is the public interest? All enabling acts of every single administrative agency requires the agency to comply with the public interest or make sure that everything is carried out in accordance with the public interest. But guess what? There's no definition anywhere on what the public interest is. So that's something that each agency or the regulator has to first define. What is the public interest on the energy market, on the energy sector, and then start aligning every single particular interest. I'm not gonna, in English, it's typically said private or public interest, but since there's a fight within Puerto Rico of a public versus private ownership of the utility, I prefer to refer to particular interest or the particular interest of each individual entity association per se. So it's the role of the regulator as a leader to align all these particular interests with the public interest. Now, what is going on the board with the political changes that has transpired is a good question. So the only thing that we could do is follow what they're doing. Are they going through a checklist? And if they're going through a checklist of everything that is required on the law, just get it out get it out. Like, and then they're just presiding over different issues, and they're not really helping to transform the energy sector. What they are creating is then additional chaos. That's what they're doing. But if they're leading, then there is a process, and then there is a method to the madness to say, why are carrying out what proceeding first, or what proceeding leads to a different proceeding? Because obviously they always have to carry out an administrative proceeding because that is required by law to make their determinations, but at least there's a method, and you can see what is the end goal. And it starts with, where do we want to be in 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, and what is the public interest?
Great. Thanks for setting it up. maybe I can ask. I mean, if anyone, Joe or Noel, if you have any thoughts to follow on from that, that'd be great. But one other thing to add maybe is, how does this impact, from a regulatory standpoint and the operations of PREPA? How different people are potentially dealing with PREPA at the moment. How is the regulator affecting or not the interaction with some of the potential PPAs that want to be, they're talking about being renegotiated and financed, or there's a couple of P3 RFPs for things like the hydroelectric assets and some peaking generation and a few other things that are kind of floating around out there. Maybe if you have any thoughts regarding those, maybe we bring that into this part of the conversation as well.
Let me, Tom, now may be a good time to kick off with my PREPA joke, if that's okay. And if it
perfect.
Okay. When I started in this, in my last job, I used to tell this joke to try to explain PREPA to people. Imagine that PREPA is an Uber, and you just, if anybody's taking an Uber, usually there's one person in the car. That person is driving, they're operating the phone and everything. If you had to do it with, if PREPA was run like Uber, you'd have about 7 to 9 people in there. And let me explain why. First off, you'd have one person driving the car and then another person operating the phone, because you can't have one person doing both. But those people are either in the blue party or the red party, so you can't have that, because then it'd be a political thing. So you have to have 2 more. So you have 4 people, 2 who drive part-time, 2 who answer the phone part-time, but now you've divided it up between the parties. But those people have no idea how to drive or operate a phone because they're political appointees. So you actually have to bring in people who know how to operate the Uber. So in PREPA's infinite wisdom, they have done a job reduction program. So they're going to replace those 4 people with 3 other folks, saving 25%, increasing efficiency by 25%. So now you have 7 people in the car. 3 of those are contractors doing the job they should be doing. So the Uber rolls up, there's 7 people. Looks like the joke where all the clowns are coming out. And you go, where do I sit? And all 7 people go, yeah, you just go in the back. And you say, wow, that's tough. I'm only going a block. And the PREPA guy goes, well, that'll be $100. You go, $100 to go in the back seat? Are you kidding me? I'm just going a block. I'd rather walk. The guy goes, we don't care if you take the Uber or not. You still have to pay us $100. The guy goes, you're a horribly run Uber. You have 7 people, or it should be 1. I'm only going a block. You're going to charge me $100 for poor service. And now you're going to charge me even if I don't have the service? This is crazy. And this is the punchline of the joke. The 7 guys tell you, we don't care whether you take this Uber or not. Our job is not to provide you transportation. Our job is to employ 7 people. And that is PREPA. If you can actually understand that, then you will understand the regulatory environment in PREPA. PREPA is not an organization whose job it is to turn dinosaur bones or wind or anything else into electrons. It is an organization that over the last 25 years, its job has become to perpetuate itself and to consolidate political power on behalf of the government. So any action, privatization, or anything else that happens with PREPA needs to be understood in that context. So now we look at all the other initiatives that are happening and they become more clear. Where was the regulator when the new governor came in and she said we needed to have a new contract, or that contract was too excessive? In any other market, that would be a regulatory activity. And the regulator would have said, show me your books, show me what's going on. There's no need for you to have that contract. You need to actually explain to me how you're going to pay that contract, because it's automatically going to increase rates, and that regulator would approve or not. But in Puerto Rico, that is a very recent phenomenon. So I know that's a little bit of a silly joke. I know it's a little bit off the top. I know it's a little bit probably insulting to many people. But the reality is that we must understand what the political reality in Puerto Rico is and what the historical reality is before PREPA is privatized. I'll stop with one other comment, and this is a true story. I was actually with the administration 48 hours after landing in Puerto Rico, and the first topic was actually the privatization of PREPA. So it's not that the government of Puerto Rico or the leadership of Puerto Rico does not want a better PREPA, does not want a better service for the people of Puerto Rico. It's that there's no other way for them to do it than the context which they had, which is a context that by definition, and as we've seen after Telegram Gate and all the FBI arrests, is really fraught with institutionalized corruption. And it's not to say that the people are bad, it's just that over the years, we have just created structures within PREPA and within the government that if I put them anywhere else, people would say that's illegal. And we need to keep those in mind as we come up with initiatives and plans, because that is job one to address. I'll give you the last example, and this is a silly one, but I was reviewing some PPOAs as part of my job in the oversight board, and at the end I see success fee, and it was $1.5 million of success fee. And the way it was written essentially was graft. It was, once this contract is awarded, you will pay this organization in PREPA $1.5 million. And I looked at our legal team, and interestingly enough, there was a completely different point of view from the consultant off-board legal team from the folks who had experience in Puerto Rico. The off-board legal team said, that's absolutely impermissible. There is no way that you can have that in a contract. Where the folks from Puerto Rico said, oh, we see that all the time. So there's never been that disconnect has existed, but it's never come together, and it was Maria that acted as a catalyst. That's all I have for now.
Great.
I have to, sorry, because Noah said something there, and I think it's more complicated. First of all, can everybody hear me well now? I just got messages that nobody can hear me, or that my volume was so low, and I just realized that now. Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
Only a bit better? Okay, let me see if so.
It sounds a lot
better. Just fine. Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. The situation in Puerto Rico is more complicated. And with PREPA, I think it's even more complicated. And I have to bring this up because Noel touched on the topic there. And it just happened that and it's the contract situation and the regulators' access or being able to stop a regulator that is a contract that is not prudent, right? That's something that regulators need to do. But in Puerto Rico, we had, on the energy sector, we had many forces trying to make the final decision on what that energy sector or PREPA would do. You have what the administration wants to do, or the administration wanted to do. You also have the FOMB with the PROMISA Act, and we also have the regulator trying to comply with Act 57 at that point, which now has been amended by Act 17. So you have different, and that's without thinking of all the private or particular interests that want to get into the mix. While I was chair, we tried to look at all PREPA's contracts, and we had opposition from FOMB. And we had a fight with FOMB because we wanted to look at the contracts. And so it is not that, I don't know if the regulator right now has been able to create a nice working environment on the energy sector regarding the contracts per se. But I had a FAF opposing the regulator on my job to be able to look at the contracts, look at the PPOAs, and determine if they were in the best interest of Puerto Rico. I do not know if the board now, the regulatory board, has been able to get into that. Were they appraised of any contracts? Did they have a standing order to force PREPA to show all the contracts? Did they try to do it and some other forces oppose it? It's more complicated because PREPA has been the golden child for a long time in Puerto Rico. So you have too many different hands in the cookie jar.
So there's a comment there, if you don't mind me jumping in. CP actually had a good comment there. You know, does a regulator even have the bandwidth and resources to review all those contracts? So Jose is actually absolutely right that there was the board, the Title III side of the board. I was the Title V side of the board. Had there was reluctance to allow the regulator at the time, which was actually Jose, to take the lead in the privatization. At the time, that was teed up as we don't yet have a mature enough structure to do that. I think we can go into history and see what happened, and you know, there's a ton of opinions. But I think the question is a good one, and I think Jose would agree with this. In Puerto Rico, we don't have a regulatory culture. You know, there is no regulatory culture for PREPA, and therefore we were in a way asking an organization that was about 5 years old by the time you came in, or less, Jose?
Less,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, to take a lead role in this. And that was a significant issue because, as everybody knows, a regulator needs not just the legal power, but also needs the organizational structure, the resources. And by the way, something that is not mentioned is that the government of Puerto Rico, on purpose, withheld resources from the Energy Commission at the time, and you can talk about that at length if you want to. But also all the connections with industry. So in any other market, the regulator is an established institution, and people know who to go to, how to work with it. You know, we basically, by the time Maria hit, we didn't even have 4 years of regulatory expertise in us. And that's not a justification for anything. All it says is that's what you're dealing with right now. For anybody coming into Puerto Rico right now, you're looking at a situation where you have what amounts to a very young regulatory structure, an almost non-existent regulatory culture when it comes to the utility, and that presents some significant issues. I would say there's a non-existent regulatory culture when it comes to anybody outside of the regulator. I'm sure that the new governor has called in the PREPA director to come in and talk, but I doubt that she has probably called in the energy board regulator and his team to actually come in and talk. And in any other market, those would actually be the people who would impose whatever remediation on the utility. So I think it's an interesting point.
Great. Thanks, Noel, and thanks, Jose. And Joe, this may be a bit inside baseball for you, and I know that you're coming to this subbing for Tom. But any thoughts that you may have on the conversation?
Yeah, I think that the current situation and the sort of uncertain regulatory structure and the sort of multiple sort of heads of decision making, that all sort of requires, underlines a need for some kind of, if there is going to be some kind of market rule set, it needs to be done in a way that does engage more stakeholders, more of industry, more community groups, and is helmed impartially, because there is an obvious, the government has what they want to do, the utility has what they want to do. You still have to be mindful of the legislative goals for energy, but need to find a way to get buy-in from everyone that you need to bring that kind of legitimacy to the regulation.
Great, thanks. So, if people are good with that, I wanted to turn our attention and think a little bit about the integrated resources plan. Overall, I'd say, as it first came out, there were causes for both optimism and pessimism in parts of the IRP. It calls for a rebuild of the grid into zones. They talk about 8, but who knows where, but it can be synchronized and desynchronized to support island-wide resiliency. It also calls for historically ambitious amounts of grid-connected rooftop solar and storage, something like, I think, if I recall, the original proposal was 2,000 megawatts and 1,000 megawatts of storage in a very short period of time. On the other hand, while it also phases out oil and coal, it develops and plans almost 2,000 megawatts of gas-fired combined cycle, baseload and peaking units run on imported LNG. You might first think that the amount of renewables is actually quite substantial, and from where we are, it is. But 2,000 megawatts of solar is the equivalent of about, call it 350 to 400 megawatts of, it's just like one gas plant in terms of its potential to generate megawatt hours, revenues, and other types of things. So clearly there's a lot going to be going on through the process. I know several people who are on this call have registered to be interveners in the language or friends of the court for the process. We ourselves at the Fundación decided that we were going to provide comments and support effectively to anyone and to everyone. We have been invited to, and hopefully will work with RMI and others who are doing similar approaches and sharing that. But more particularly on the IRP itself, what do people think about this? And as far as the regulatory process, where do they expect things to end up? I'll note the comments about this being a young, inexperienced regulator, and this has the potential as a process to get out of control. So I'll anyone who wants to jump in first on that one, I'm happy to let them go.
All right, I'll start. Yeah. Well, there are two things really, and let me just tell you about my experience. Because yes, when we started, we were a fairly new regulatory body. First time that an independent regulator was put to oversee PREPA. But what is curious about the situation in Puerto Rico is, and that's where it makes it extremely challenging. It is not that PREPA did not have a regulator before the Energy Commission started. Because PREPA, being a public entity, has a PREPA board. And the PREPA board is supposed to do the function of regulating what PREPA does. The PREPA board or PREPA, due to the years, they just lost their way for whatever reason. We can go around and around and tell the whole history. So that was why an independent regulatory body was put in charge of overseeing PREPA. Now, the situation that you have is that PREPA is still a public utility, but not a public utility as an investor-owned utility. It's a publicly owned utility. It's pretty much government regulating government, right? So that's where the big challenge of PREPA or the situation started happening. When we joined the commission, or when I joined the commission, and the first thing that we did was just learn. That's what I did, just start learning everything that I didn't know. And I got my hands on every single topic matter, any literature out there, talking to all different other commissioners, other commissions, what are they doing? And we went through a rate case proceeding, and we went through an IRP proceeding as well as we started performance proceedings. Now that is the institutional knowledge from the previous proceedings I do not know how it has moved or has been kept with the new regulatory board, because it has pretty much was exploded. It was imploded, right? So from 3-member board, it got increased to 5-member boards. Out of the 5, 4 are new members. So you have new blood with a steep learning curve in the middle of a substantial transformation or a desire to change the structure of PREPA. And the key challenge is really, are they restructuring the market? Are they just changing the ownership, or just the ownership structure of PREPA, but not really restructuring the market? So there are many uncertainties that is happening with the IRP proceeding. On the IRP proceeding, there were new rules that were developed. That was one of the last things that I did while being chair of the commission. And the spirit of the rules were to divide the IRP proceeding on 2 phases. The first phase was to gather all the people together, all stakeholders, not interveners, but just to gather stakeholders and not talk about, okay, are we going to use capacity expansion model? Are we going to use how many? No. The idea of the first phase was to talk, what are the scenarios? What is the future that we want? And let's get everybody on board deciding what should we analyze? What is the future that we want? And that's what we're going to analyze towards, or what are we going to transform the energy sector to. And then once that was decided or determined by the commission, then phase 2 would start, and with the traditional IRP proceeding of interveners, and let's look at the analysis and tweak here and there. The challenge that I see is obviously the law. There's a spirit of the law or the rules when you draft them or write them, and then the people actually in charge of implementing them just read it and then interpret what they see on the paper as well. So phase 2 was carried out differently from what I had envisioned. And it was mainly PREPA and the Bureau going over completeness of the file. And then now you start a very aggressive calendar proceeding to approve an IRP. So I have concerns about the way the IRP is going, or the IRP that has been filed and presented, but I'm not there. I am not privy to the actual confidential information either. So I can only see and judge from the orders, the resolutions that the Bureau has done or has decided on, as well as the public data. But I have my concerns on some of the parameters, some of the scenarios that are being evaluated. I have concern about the framing of the proceeding, because it's easy to talk about microgrids and mini grids, but really when you look at the actual technical data, you're not there. You're just framing it as a mini grid or a microgrid, but you're not really doing an analysis per se on that level. So that, I mean, those are just my flags that I see.
Great.
And yeah.
Maybe Joe or Noel, any thoughts on the proceedings, where they should go? Anything as a kind of an overview?
Joe, you want to take this? I got a couple of thoughts having to do with more strategic. I think I share a lot of the concerns that Jose Roman has. Here's my concern. My fear is that the government of Puerto Rico is going to spend a ton of resources crafting, or actually PREPA is going to spend a ton of money crafting an RFP for review by the Energy Bureau, and none of it is going to be implemented whatsoever. That's the track record that the government of Puerto Rico has. There's going to be a lot of work. There's going to be a lot of discussion. There's going to be a lot of modeling. And at the end of the day, nobody's actually going to consider that binding or actionable like it would in any other market. Why is that important? It's because if we go into a privatization scenario, which I hope we do, and I think it's the right approach, that buyer, that concessionaire for T&D, and whoever ends up buying whatever amount of generation is not scuttled on the island, is going to make investments based on what they see on the IRP, because it's the only document that's out there. Puerto Rico doesn't have a viable energy strategy, but it does have, or it will have, an approved IRP. They will move out in that direction, but the market is not going to be moving in that direction, and the government support is not going to be moving in that direction. And when they go back to the regulator and say, we want to hold people accountable because this is what it says in the IRP, and we're moving towards that, distributed generation. We're moving towards, 300 net megawatts of renewable or equivalent. I'm sorry. We're stepping away from legacy fuels. We want to reduce our fuel and purchase price. The regulator is going to say that's fascinating but irrelevant. I have no power to do that because I haven't been given the political power to change that. That's my significant concern.
Thank you.
So I can't speak, to those challenges, but I think that there are a lot of there does need to be some back and forth from the IRP where it stands right now. Even with the with the mini grid system, that's still, it isn't quite still not a decentralized grid system. They're still investing in large central power plants, and it comes down to the credibility of the legislative goals for renewable energy. If you're going to have 100% renewable energy by 2050, building 1,000 megawatts of natural gas plants in 2025, those are going to be stranded and be either drive the price of energy from 2025 to 2050 way up as they have to get their investment back out, or you're gonna have a large stranded asset as you're trying to ramp up solar investment. And so there's a real choice to be made there. I guess the first IRP got rejected because it didn't meet the renewable goals, and so if the next IRP does meet them, that's great. And I think it will take a large amount of distributed resources, of behind the meter resources, to meet those renewable energy goals and to prevent grid defection, which the IRP also doesn't address in a, it tries to address, but I don't think addresses adequately. So I think, again, it comes back to having, a buy-in from all of the market participants, and creating a regulatory environment where there is transparency and accountability and, real, input and trust from all of the participants. And that's the challenge.
So
Yeah.
Tom,
Yeah, please.
Can I jump on that super quick?
Yeah.
Because I think, and I've seen a couple of the comments here, which is, what is the stakeholder that can do that? First off, the comment that Joe made just earlier, if you read the award of that contract, that LNG contract, right out as the IRP was coming out, you are either lying about not you, but the government was either lying about the renewable targets, or they were planning on a stranded cost right up front.
Yeah.
But you can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't you can't have it both ways. So that was, and by the way, I think if you got into the RP and you really read it and all that, that'd be fine. But I need to look at it the way the market looks like it. And that, I think, caused significant market confusion. People are saying, man, I'm about to point some serious money on a renewable investment. And yet they're giving out this this super juicy, overpriced contract with no competitive bid. Nothing was public about it. Apparently those people ended up doing some off-the-cuff infrastructure improvements to the site, and that's why they quote unquote got it. It just smells very fishy, and it prevents people from coming into this market. A strong regulatory market, what Jose Roman tried to start, and the government tried to shoot him down. I saw it every day for about 2 years. Would have basically said, hey, but you cannot do that. We're going to have to review this contract to see if it's the award of the contract to see if it's consistent with the IRP, all the things that we know and love, but it didn't really happen that way. And I think that's very important. But back to the point that CPN and a number of folks are making is, who's that outside stakeholder? And I would submit to everybody, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this, is that we're not going to fix this internally. It's going to be a combination of some sort of NGO, but ultimately it's whoever has the money makes the rules, the golden rule. And I think at some point DOE, possibly FEMA, and most definitely HUD will have a stake in this by creating conditions for the disbursement of federal funds to rebuild the grid. Because all three of those have a stake to play. All three of those have access to funds for Puerto Rico. And at some point, my view, and this is what the conversations that I'm having with folks at the federal space, is that they need to say, okay, but it's fascinating that you're at the meeting, but I really need to be talking to the regulator, and I'm going to talk to them about the disbursement of money for the electrical grid. And I think as a community, what can we do is start having setting that expectation for PREPA with the federal space, with public and civic engagement.
You think it'll ever happen that we'll find crowds in the streets outside of, in Hatoré or in front of AEE, the same way we did for Rosario? What's going to take to get attention?
So that's a great question. I don't think so. But you know what I do think so? That the renewables industry could band together in Puerto Rico and essentially enlist the regulator, the PREB, as its ally in this engagement. I think the renewables folks in Puerto Rico need to go to that group should feel comfortable going to Rick Scott as the quote unquote senator from Puerto Rico, to Jennifer Gonzalez, to Grijalva, to Chairman Bishop, or ex-Chairman Bishop, now Chairman Grijalva, to any of those key stakeholders, and letting them know, listen, I'm doing my job as a citizen here, and I'm telling you that we need to start treating the regulator with the deference required, and we need to hold PREPA accountable to that regulator, and that starts with who you disperse the money to and who ultimately has control of those federal funds. I know it's a crazy idea. You probably won't have that crowd marching in front of Fortaleza, but that's not what they need to do. And then let's go to the second order. What about industriales? We all know that 20% of Puerto Rico's GDP, the pharma industry, is thinking of leaving the island. If they do, it's game over, right? Because we cannot make up a 20% job hit, even if it's just by deferred investments. So you need to keep those people in Puerto Rico. It turns out that one of the key concerns they have beyond tax policy is energy costs and energy reliability. So let's start addressing that. Let's have, as a group, as a community, engaging with those folks and say, I got any number of folks who could fix your problem technically, but that's not the point. The point is, would you benefit from actually a combined engagement at the federal level that has the federal government expecting the kind of rate structure that we need for the market to work?
Maybe that's a good segue to start talking about the wheeling regulations that are sort of front and center. The notice of regulation was put out by the regulator 30 plus days ago. Several people have commented. We've put in comments from the Fundación and made those available publicly. PREPA's comments came out last night. They are kind of a study in potentially stalling behind legalese. They are calling, this is one thing we agree on, for a technical commission to look at the balance pricing mechanism and to set the other rules around wheeling rates, et cetera. Where we probably differ is that they are specifically wanting to limit, at least for the foreseeable future, wheeling beneficiaries to the large commercial and industrial. If they're successful, I think it would be unfortunate. There may be workarounds in the microgrid rules and elsewhere, but developing that market where you can have confidence, you can't do community solar, for example, until you actually have these things up. And there are a number of other business plans and practices that we're involved with, people on this call and in the audience. So one way of addressing that is to open this up where they continue to make money and control, but do begin to address the concerns for the CNI. Probably a bit. I don't need to go on any further. Several people here have been looking at that. But the wheeling itself, kind of a blank slate right now, but very important in terms of getting this in place for investment and stability. So thoughts from the panel?
I would just say that they're all. I think that the technical commission is a good idea. We've seen that work elsewhere. We've been a part of that process in several other states, and the important thing is sort of who is on the technical commission, and what is the sort of balance of power in it. Even you would really want a impartial third party to be the one proposing ideas and sort of level setting there. And also you have to think about who's what people have the investment and the ability to invest a lot of time into that process, because technical commissions and stakeholder groups, those are where PREPA could try to really drag things out and try to outlast other interested parties. So you have to find a way to either sort of set time limits on that, or have other people that can also sort of go to distance with the utility.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in our recommendations were that PREPA must be part of that committee, right? Committee of stakeholders, as you said, kind of moderated by an independent party. Thanks again to the PACE Center. We took our cue in terms of the description from the panel that was put in place to determine many of these same things in the state of New York a couple of years ago. So if you want, I won't bore people with that or thrill people with that, but you can see that in our comments, which everybody has access to. Thanks, Joe. I don't know if Noel or Jose, if there's other things.
There is it's a path forward. I mean, it's the first time we're talking about wheeling rules, but this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the call. Is the regulator presiding or leading these efforts, right? I mean, wheeling regulation is just a trading arrangement, right? We have a trading arrangement of all the multiple, either you have the wheeling model, the centralized model, integrated model, whatever it is, depending what you have, PJM, or whatever you have. But I don't see, and you can't blame PREPA for opposing wheeling regs. I mean, really, it's a utility whose business model is to sell, the electricity. So obviously they're going to oppose any type of, threat to that model. It's the challenge is that PREPA is still seen as a driver of public policy. And then people start getting angry because, well, they are opposing the policy of wheeling. Well, that's their business. They are going to oppose wheeling. The key is, let's get PREPA away from the policy making. You leave the policy making to the legislators, you let the regulators do all the whatever they need to do, and PREPA just needs to run the utility and comply with the law and comply with the rules. Now you have an IRP. The IRP is not contemplating wheeling, is not contemplating, say, they are contemplating putting natural gas central plants all over Puerto Rico. Is one of them gonna participate on the wheeling model? Is that what they are contemplating? Or is that still gonna be the model of a single buyer, which is gonna be the concessionaire, that is gonna have long-term PPAs with all of these plants, and then you're gonna have a big stranded cost at the end, like you guys were mentioning before. I mean, it seems like we are doing a shotgun approach of every single thing that the Act requires. I mean, it's good that there are rules being put in place, that the discussion is happening, but also Act 77 requires the regulator to do a study on what type of energy market can be developed in Puerto Rico in order to maximize the public interest, right? Is it needed to move away from the monopoly structure model? Or are we gonna open a wholesale market on the generation side? Or when are we gonna go to have access, retail access? I mean, these are questions that the regulator has to start thinking, and how one thing impacts the other, because the Act requires that none of the remaining captive PREPA or concessionaire consumers are impacted by all the consumers that are leaving to participate on the wheeling. So you have this mismatch, or I see, of policies that are taking place simultaneously. And that's what it concerns me, of all of this happening at the same time. And I'm not opposing wheeling regulation rule. I'm saying that there has to be okay, let's then incorporate it on the IRP. What's the expectation? How much are we losing? Let's say 20% of the commodity is gonna be lost. PREPA sales are gonna be lost to all these third-party providers. How would now that impact the IRP that they are doing, or the PPAs that they are planning to make in the future? That's the part of the holistic approach that the regulator has to do, especially because they are the ones that started the wheeling reg proceeding. They open up that proceeding. So they have to keep tabs on how one impacts the other.
Right, and they in their comments on the wheeling regulations to PREPA, they brought that forward particularly, is the contradiction between what they're being asked to do in terms of protecting the remaining folks on the grid. But again, I would argue that as this is done correctly, it should actually make PREPA more profitable. Effectively renting and operating its system, it provides greater information and planning, less responsibility, probably the potential to reduce or to defer capital expenditures that they may be currently planning if they're thinking about having to control and rebuild the entire grid. Greater information about where to focus their attention and capital expenditure. But clearly this isn't really well understood by anyone, including PREPA, and they don't have the control. So yeah, I mean, right back at lots of uncertainty. I think we hope people will keep going and try and find stages, plateaus.
Well, I think that all the stakeholders, especially the ones in the call and everybody that participates, should go back to the Bureau and say, okay, we're putting the rules together and this is great. Now, what kind of market? Let's start getting on that study right now. And what kind of market are you envisioning? Are we talking about a wholesale market? At what level? What is going to be how is going to be the participation? Because it could be a situation might develop where wheeling becomes a situation that is not a competitive approach. Because if PREPA is still producing at 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and your production is 12 cents, 13 cents, there's no way you're gonna be able to match what PREPA produces and to be able to sell the energy. Especially because all the additional rate requirements, meaning subsidies, help to people of low income, municipal lighting, lighting at night, the municipality electricity usage, all of that is gonna transition away from PREPA, and everybody is gonna have to pay for it. So every single wheeling or provider needs to take that into consideration, that you are not competing against the 20 cents, 22 cents, 24 cents that PREPA has. No, will be competing at a much lower rate. So that's something that every stakeholder needs to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that obviously, frankly, lowers the risk from, PREPA and the government standpoint, if that's understood. There are additional policies that probably need to be worked out to make sure that you're not disincentivizing, certain types of distributed generation within that. You're not creating, a policy that says we want distributed generation and renewables, and then saying that, but everybody has to pay an equal amount of the transition charge for the debt. I mean, these are things that need to be worked out, and not all of them run through the regulator, I would say, but the regulator can take a lead, should take a lead in pointing out, the benefits or the absurdities in certain requirements relating to the development and investment in the system. So. Joe, are you on? Do you want to say something?
Yes.
There you go.
Great, thanks. So yeah, and just to your point earlier about the potential benefits of distributed generation and of wheeling customers, as broken as PREPA may be, we still have to consider them in this process and make reveal part of the market has to reveal value for PREPA. You can't just strip customers and strip generation from them, and there has to be something in it for them too that allows them to continue operating begin to operate a viable business model. So that is something that has to be clearly defined.
Yeah, I mean, if I was standing in front of the commission, and I haven't seen all the numbers, but I could probably argue, given the nature of their generation, the oil plants, and the fact that they one gas plant and one coal plant that private, and a handful that frankly they don't make money on generation anyway, right? They probably lose money on generation.
Yeah.
So I mean, what is the point? Like, stop resisting. Get over it. You're gonna make more money by managing the system, charging for your services, right sizing your operational budget, lowering your employee count, and then focusing on optimizing your capital spend in relation to both the organic and the haphazard amount of growth that's going to come. And rely on the regulator to help, support that while you help support the growth of the market. You could easily be, aligned in your incentives to support the growth. Let other people put the money in. We'll just expend our services, and if they're putting money in somewhere, we know we need to put our investment here in creating the T&D system that supports that and moves the power around, rather than guessing up front where everything's going to go. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Noel or anybody else want to add things? I'll point out we're at 3:05, and I did reserve an hour and 20 or an hour and 25 minutes for this because I thought there would be questions. Maybe final thoughts or comments, and then we'll open it up to questions. Just to type the questions in the chat box, and then I think we can all see them. But if not, I'll let people know what they are.
Actually, a pretty good one there. CPA said, Tom, how does PREPA lose money on generation? If you can talk to that, and if you don't want to, I'll have some ideas as well.
Yeah, you've probably seen more of the numbers than I've had. I'm just looking at it kind of in relief, and knowing what the stations are. Yes, they're adding margins onto the fuel and a few other things that they're doing, but I got to imagine that that's going to end.
I'm sorry, no, they cannot. They cannot add margin to the fuel. That's against the law.
Yes.
I mean, there was an investigation, and granted, was an investigation on that. But assuming that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is what we are, jumping from that assumption, they cannot mark up a fuel.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I take that back. There was a markup allowed by law that it changed. But the markup that was allowed by law was to pay for the municipality electricity, for the subsidies, and for the nightlight, really.
Right.
So that's But yeah, please. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify that point. Sorry.
Cool.
There's a couple of interesting points on that one. There's a little bit of noise behind me. I apologize. But one of the big ones is that PREPA actually dispatches about 10% more power than it actually needs, even with all the ops margins in place. So that's a well-known fact. That's actually probably being investigated by somebody right now, because that was actually instituted as part of their operations. And there is some suggestion that the reason why that was put on there was when there was a big fuel and purchase price, a big fuel deal cut with the primary diesel provider many years ago. So there's people who are unpacking that. But the other one on why they lose money on generation, frankly, is operational inefficiencies. So an interesting one, Ecoeléctrica and Costa Sur have roughly about the same power output. Ecoeléctrica operates with about, I think, 82 people to generate about 450 megawatts with about 97% uptime. Costa Sur has 320 people, I believe it was, and they're 60-something% uptime. So just if you do those numbers, they're losing an astounding amount just on operations just because of poor management. And that plant is running at 100%, but it's only providing 60% of the electrons that another entity has, and it probably has about 2 to 3 times net personnel costs. So that's one of the other reasons.
Yep.
I do agree that there are some inefficiencies. I don't think that they lose the money, or that it should not be portrayed as the generation market is a lose money market. So if it's properly run, you can make money on the generation, or you can make money on the T&D, or you make money on the retail, right? They're all different markets and different business models, but it's just the way that if they are run properly or not.
No, I'm in violent agreement with you, without a doubt. I think that the point that I was trying to make is that PREPA is not prepared to run those efficiencies. The private sector, Ecoeléctrica, was very profitable at a very competitive, delivery into the grid. So I think it's doable, and I'm completely with you. I'm 100% in agreement. I think there is an opportunity for the market to actually be lucrative and control costs on behalf of the consumer. My assessment and my opinion is that PREPA is not there yet. They're unable to do that because of the way they're structured.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Absolutely. So, folks on the phone, if you've got questions, if you're sort of tuned in, do you want to type those questions. If you're dialing in, I don't know if you can take yourselves off mute, but I know they've got little things like raise your hand, etc. on here, which I'm not particularly skilled at operating. But let's see what we get. So, well, we got another question from CP. One little Joe Public has no idea the intricacies involved. Basically, how do we let Don Juan and Doña Fela understand what is happening and its impact?
I think that's actually something that we have here at PACE. We have a sort of track record of doing of community engagement, of engaging with sort of coalitions of local community organizations. We've centered around, we have one coalition that's centered around energy efficiency that pulls in everyone from NAACP and all kinds of other different stakeholders that aren't usually in the energy space. And I think that engaging with those kind of grassroots networks is something that we've had a lot of success with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just comment. I've been talking to Tom Bourgeois, who's not on the call, who's the deputy director of the center. We've been working together, and taking comments. Our focus at the Fundación has been more, high level direction, looking at associations and talking to them. I think we're going to be looking for funding to help support that and grow, as every nonprofit must. But the concept of being able to expand this to provide local meetings, local input is very interesting. But I would definitely want, and I'd ask people who are here and elsewhere, potentially partnering with groups in Puerto Rico to hold those sort of local meetings and talk through some of these things. Would love to support that, but I don't think that we could lead it on our own. So I mean, CP, you're definitely a leader in this area, and thanks for the question. I don't know.
Yeah, can I just like to jump on it? PREPA has given us essentially a great entree into that discussion, and that's dividing the island up into whatever 8 regions is what was in the IRP.
Right.
What if basically we as a community take it upon ourselves to have engagement at that regional level? I think if you have an island-wide, hey, PREPA sucks, clam bake or whatever, people are just going to come in and it's going to be, more of the same. Yeah, it's terrible, but it's going to be very difficult to get any focus and have anything actionable because the problem is so large. But if you're looking at a regional issue or a regional approach, I think it may have some legs. And let me give you an example. Villalba has a Cooperativa de la Montaña down south. I know CP is working on one up in Utuado, but there's 5 municipalities that have banded together, looked at hydro as their base load, as their base generation, and then looking at industry and how they can partner with industry to meet their requirements. I think that's a very innovative, visionary way forward, and it's probably one of the ways to attack this problem.
Good point. Good point.
It's very difficult, CP, to have Don Juan and Doña Fela understand, because now we are talking as it's easier to have PREPA as the bad guy, like Noel said, and he's gonna have everybody, yeah, PREPA is the bad guy, we hate PREPA, and yada yada, and the ones that have electricity or they got electricity fairly quickly, they don't see PREPA as such a bad guy either, So you have that problem, and then you start talking about the rates. People don't understand the rates. Now, the law requires the bills to be more transparent, and I think they're even more difficult to understand for the average person, because now you have too many items there that they do not know what they are. And typically they see, and when I was at the commission, people will come to me on the street and they will be like, listen, they are charging me, they're stealing from me because they have this fuel charge here and power charge here. And so PREPA is stealing, stealing money from me. And I have to explain to them, that's part of the rate. That's not that they are, I mean, if there's a problem with your bill, that's a different story. But if you have to come and we'll look at it, it's very complicated to translate the energy language, the energy jargon, so that Don Juan y Doña Fela understand and start, besides, oh, you're gonna save money. Because that's typically what some other people say. Oh, you're gonna save money, you're gonna put your PV system and you're not gonna pay to PREPA anymore. And then they don't realize that they are paying for the PV system, so they substitute one payment to another payment. So they don't see it also as that they do not understand the type of investment they're making. So it's really education, and I do not know the answer. How to translate the energy jargon that all of us here on this call understand and are used to speaking to someone that doesn't have a clue, and the only thing that they want is just to plug on the TV or get their AC working, and that's what they understand. And my communications people were on my case every single day because they were, Roman, you have to speak clearly so that people understand you. Stop talking about kilowatt hours. Stop talking about capacity. Stop talking about that. People don't understand that. And even the people that interviewed me, I could see their eyes just go completely blank when I started talking about answering the question on the jargon that we understand. So I guess CP, I'm referring to you because you asked the question, you're gonna have to help us figure out how to translate this and how to make people, everyone understand and become an actor, a participant on the market, and not just a passive victim.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's obviously something I'd be happy to look at. I like Noel's idea. If we can, take some elements of this discussion, but more specific to kind of educational on a regional basis, what's going on locally has to be covered in relation to that region to bring it home. But talk about why wheeling is important, why setting these rules in a certain way is important, why why the transition charges are the way they are or could be. And hello to young Roman. You're on mute, Jose.
Sorry, I just remembered that CNN interview.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So
yeah,
look, I'd definitely be interested in exploring it with people here on the call and on the ground. It's maybe not something we can jump on right away, but definitely something that I think you'd be interested in doing, basically taking it to the regions, and maybe it requires a little more thought. I think there's a question from Nico. I don't know if you wanted to answer something or add something to that.
Yeah, no, I was reading that question, and just so everybody knows, I'm going to reread it. With the transition charges and other fees gradually increasing over the years, we're looking at interconnected entities to be taking a big financial hit. Mass don't work for distributed energy generation services. What's a scenario outside island mode that could work? I think that's a really important question, and I'm going to turn that question around if people don't mind. What is the impact of a lot of these fees on grid defection and on technology adoption? I'd like to think of the problem in those terms. And here's a silly example, okay? We sort of have all been agreeing that 21 cents per kilowatt hour and below is where the sweet spot needs to be for the economic reality in Puerto Rico. Right now, there's a very good chance that in 2020, we'll be getting close to 24 cents with no commensurate increase or decrease in SAFE-SAIDI. And that's bad. That's really bad, because I think industry is going to be highly sensitive to power quality and cost at that point, and folks will be making a decision to leave. If they leave and they're taxed because of wheeling or a disconnection charge, or they still have to pay a legacy debt fee, then the answer is pretty simple. The math is clear. They leave the island. So I think there is a case to be made, again, at the federal level, saying, feds, we have a situation right now where, because we don't have a strong regulator, a monopolistic utility is making some unilateral decisions that are going to cripple this economy. Forget about the board, forget about the government. This is about private industry saying, you need to know that I'm going to leave if this is not fixed. Those voices need to be heard. I don't know exactly, I don't have an answer on that, but I know those voices need to be heard. And right now they're not in DC saying we need to hold PREPA accountable. But, you know, just the reality is that PREPA generates on average, I think it's like 9 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour is the aggregate if you get all their generation costs essentially averaged out. If you were in the States, the price at the meter would be 14, 15 cents. In Puerto Rico, it's 21, 22. So we have 100% surcharge for T&D, for a T&D that is substandard, that has the worst reliability metrics of any utility in the States. So we're paying far more for far less. And we're going to get to pay more because of bad management. That just doesn't compute. The average citizen, you know, can change his or her reality by $168 trip from JetBlue to Orlando. Not everybody has that option, but industries do. Companies do. And that's something that needs to be brought up at a broader level, because that's the real economic reality of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I would just note that the transition charges that have been put forward, based on the debt restructuring and other things, they're not final. They need to go through the judge. They need to go through the Congress and the Senate, and of course the government of Puerto Rico, and they're contradictory in terms of the way that they approach policy. It was, let's do this like stupid simple. We're just going to apply it to everyone. That way we don't have to think about it too hard. They did zero thinking. I mean, less than zero thinking. It was, this is how much we need. We're just going to apply it to everyone. Let's not worry about what it means. And so it's misapplied and bad and contradictory, policy. So that's going to have to be thought about. Having said that as well, and my comments are out there on the debt deal and others, and there's an advantage to getting something done quickly, but it should be it should be better than it seems to be, and the ability of the government to kind of respond in real time, the government regulator, et cetera, to these contradictions is lacking. I'll add one thing though, which is, everyone who looks at this says, oh, it's 1 cent or 2.4 cents, and everybody's paying it, and this is just going to pay off the debt. And it's true from one point of view, but the structure of the agreement is important. It does free up operations. It also basically takes a charge on the system for restructuring, but it won't be out there forever. It won't be, right? You're not going to leave, reissued bonds at 7 to 8% with this kind of a drain on your operations. Once the system is settled, you could say if the system is settled, but once the system is settled, there's a return to the capital markets, and the credit structures and recovery rates and everything for PREPA or its replacements is in place. These things are all going to be refinanced, right? So this isn't something that's going to go on forever. And if you don't get to the point in a handful of years, 5, 6, 7 years, at kind of the outside, where you can refinance something, then it's probably heading in the other direction, and you're going to restructure and do a new deal. So I personally am much more focused on what are the things that you can do to align your interests in terms of the policy within the regulator, within the government, and support for those things, rather than getting too up in arms about a particular level of payment into a restructured debt restructuring. Less would be better, but there's an advantage to moving quickly as well.
No, that's what makes this problem a wicked problem. We are really having to analyze this in a system standpoint. Your comment about a renegotiation of that debt at some point, I think, is appropriate. But what is this? Who is the stakeholder, primary stakeholder, who's going to be doing that renegotiation? And that actually will change based on how successful we are in the coming years, coming short years, to really establish a lot of these policies. To me, the nightmare scenario is that we codify into statute a lot of bad decisions that don't have the benefit of a really strong economic analysis, combined with a weak regulator that cannot go back and say, hey, you know what, we made a mistake. The right answer is that PREPA, as it stands today, essentially ceases to exist in about 18 months. A new entity comes in, and they actually work hand in hand with a strong regulator, an empowered regulator, to really come up with the least cost solution across the board. That least cost solution is going to be, it's going to mean getting rid of a lot of stranded assets out there across the board that are near and dear to PREPA's heart. People think that they're national assets or whatever, but in the reality, they're decrepit, costly, environmentally harmful infrastructure that just should have been destroyed, demoed about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So we need to have this is a participation sport. I'll put it that way. We're going to have to really work very, very closely, I think, not just with the local entities, but with the federal entities, to make sure that at least the options for sustained growth, economic growth, are not shut because of PREPA's bad decisions.
Good point. Jose, any final comments? We'll get some from you and from Joe, and then we'll bring this to an end. We're having fun, but this is getting toward the end of our time.
Well, yeah, I have a little Roman walking around. So yes, yeah. This is listen, there's not a clear answer, right? This is a challenging problem with it's like a dragon with 7 heads, and there are some things that I do not agree with seeing the utility as a driver of economic development. I think that puts more burden on the utility than required. Now, the utility might be a problem to economic development, or the price of the utility of electricity might refer a challenge. But I just don't like to see the utility as a driver, because it now takes a whole different, start assigning economic decisions, economic development, policy decisions to the utility. And what they have to be concerned about is on running an efficient operation. And then let everyone else worry about the economic development. But that's, it's not that we haven't said that here, but it's something that I hear typically on a narrative from the legislators, that to assign PREPA as economic driver. And supposedly that's why then they start making some decisions on expensive central plants, because they need to drive the economy with all the jobs that that's going to create. So it's first, we need to have this paradigm shift. I mean, the utility just needs to be the utility, comply with the law and comply with the policy and comply with the rules. And then have all the policymakers and all the stakeholders participate on the policy making process and say, where do we want to go? What is the economic development policies need to be in place? And how can the electricity price hinder that process? But it's very, very difficult while we have PREPA CEO sitting as part of the cabinet, pretty much. and making policy decisions or driving policy. It's very challenging. I just encourage no one to lose faith. It's a marathon, really.
Tom, I think you had the, you now have the.
Now I'm on. Now
No,
I'm
you
on.
have the agenda. Jose Roman's last comment was the agenda for your next WebEx, which is utility and economic development, because we could unpack that for a while, and it'd be a very conversation.
Well, that sounds like an in-person meeting with a host bar.
I'm in for that.
So Joe, sorry, I was on mute. Any final thoughts, and I'll wrap this up.
I think final thoughts are, you need to, keep pressure on PREPA or PREPA's successor through strong regulation and through impartial policy planning to, meet the goals of the legislature and to, prevent cutting off future possibilities by the grid that we rebuild now. We don't want to, build something that's going to be obsolete or to not be flexible enough in the future to meet everyone's needs and meet the goals that have been set out. So it's a really crucial time to keep pressure on and to make sure that the right decisions are made.
Yep, that's the way we get. So I want to just want to mention, look, Fundación. I want to thank people for joining. We do have a fiscal sponsor, and so we are in a position to take tax-exempt donations. I've got to get used to asking every time. Please give a little, give a lot. We're looking to raise more money to support specific programs, and we are inching closer daily to having our own determination letter, so we don't need to rely on fiscal sponsorship. Having made that statement and request for support, I want to thank the panelists for providing their input, their thoughts, and their expertise. We'll look forward to doing more of these as we go. I want to thank everyone who joined. I hope this was beneficial. Please let us know whether or not this was helpful, and frankly, what other things you would like us to focus on. I personally will be back in Puerto Rico for probably a couple of weeks in September. There are a number of potential events going on there. Jose and I are looking potentially to rerun our workshop on accessing capital for energy projects in Puerto Rico. We haven't set that up yet, but looking potentially to do that on the 19th or the 20th of September. Plus, we are looking at have been invited to stage an event for National Clean Energy Week, which is still in development. Hopefully, we'll be letting people know more about that, but that'll probably be the 23rd or the 24th in San Juan, where we're going to be putting a highlight or a spotlight on innovation in Puerto Rico in the redevelopment of energy, organizationally, financially, and from a policy perspective. That's it. Thanks again, and have a great day. Be well.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.